The Captain's Legacy, Steve Yzerman's evolution from NHL star to mastermind GM, the deep dive.
Join us on the deep dive as we explore the incredible career of Steve Yzerman, the longest-serving captain in North American Major League sports history. From his draft day arrival as a consolation prize, to leading the Detroit Red Wings to 3 Stanley Cup championships, to his gold medal triumphs with Team Canada, and his brilliant managerial stint with the Tampa Bay Lightning, we unpack what makes Stevie Y a true hockey legend. Whether you're a die-hard NHL fan or just fascinated by elite sports leadership and management, this deep dive reveals the untold resilience and strategic genius behind his Hall of Fame career.
Imagine stepping into a professional sports locker room. You're just completely surrounded by some of the most elite, highly driven, and honestly highly opinionated athletes on the planet.
Absolutely. The egos in a room like that are a very real factor to manage.
Right, and the daily pressure to perform is immense. The physical toll of the game is, well, it's something most of us can barely even comprehend.
Not at all.
Now, imagine being named the absolute leader of that room, the captain, and holding on to that title not just for a season or two, but for 19 consecutive seasons.
Yeah, that is just a staggering number. 19.
Over 1,300 games wearing the captain's C on your jersey. It's a record in North American Major League sports history that is entirely unmatched.
Unmatched and, honestly, probably untouchable.
Totally. So, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are looking at the comprehensive biography and career timeline of a true Detroit sports icon. Whether you know him as Stevie Y or simply the captain, we are digging into the incredible legacy of Steve Yzerman.
And our mission for this deep dive is to decode the anatomy of elite leadership, profound resilience, and continuous reinvention. We aren't just here to read off a list of hockey statistics.
Right. Nobody wants just a stat sheet reading.
Exactly. We really want to understand how a teenager who was drafted as a fallback option transformed into an iconic two-way hockey legend, meaning, a player who is just as dominant defensively as they are offensively.
And then how he morphed into one of the most brilliant, strategic front office masterminds the sport has ever seen.
It really is a study in adapting to survive and ultimately to dominate.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the way his career starts is a total masterclass in dealing with mismatched expectations. We have to go back to the 1983 NHL entry draft.
Setting the scene here is crucial.
Yeah, so Mike and Marianne Ilitch had just purchased the Detroit Red Wings. The franchise was really struggling. Around the league, people commonly refer to them as the Dead Wings.
Which is brutal, but accurate for the time.
Right. So the new ownership group is desperate to make a splash. They want to revitalize the fan base. And their general manager at the time, Jim DeVillano, had his heart completely set on drafting a kid named Pat LaFontaine.
Yeah, because LaFontaine was a local hero. He grew up right outside Detroit.
The absolute perfect marketing dream to sell tickets to a struggling fan base.
It was the classic hometown savior narrative. They desperately wanted the local kid to be the face of their new era.
But the draft order doesn't care about your marketing strategy.
No, it does not. The New York Islanders were picking 3rd overall, and they just snatched LaFontaine right off the board.
Leaving the Red Wings, who were picking 4th, to pivot, DeVillano had to settle for a relatively quiet kid playing for the Peterborough Petes in the Ontario Hockey League. He drafted Steve Yzerman.
The consolation prize.
Entirely the backup plan, which is wild to think about now, given his legacy.
And it wasn't like they handed him the keys to the franchise on day one either. He wasn't even guaranteed a spot on the NHL roster that fall.
No, the organization was fully prepared to send him right back to Peterborough for another year of junior hockey to develop. But then, rookie training camp happens.
And there's this incredible detail from that camp regarding Ken Holland.
Yeah, Holland, who later became a legendary general manager himself, was actually a minor league goaltender for the Red Wings at that exact training camp.
And he noted that after just one single session on the ice, the entire organization knew they had something incredibly special on their hands.
What's fascinating here is how quickly he had to prove his worth. He didn't come in with the protective halo of being the chosen one.
No, he had to battle for his spot from minute one. And while he did secure that roster spot and put up a remarkable rookie season, we shouldn't pretend he was a complete, flawless player right out of the gate.
Right, but I mean, the offensive production was undeniable. He tallied 39 goals and 87 points in that rookie season.
Which is huge.
And he became the first 18-year-old and the youngest player ever to play in an NHL All-Star game. He was exactly 18 years and 267 days old. That record stood for 27 years.
He wasn't the hometown kid they originally wanted, but his raw talent made him instantly indispensable.
He was a scoring sensation, absolutely. But as you mentioned, he was also heavily sheltered defensively in those early years.
Yeah, his defensive game was a bit of a liability, which was pretty typical for young stars of that highly offensive era. He was just figuring out how to survive in a very physical league.
And that initial imbalance in his game actually sets the perfect stage for the biggest crisis of his career later on.
Which brings us to his first major test of leadership. Fast forward to just before the 1986-87 season, the previous captain leaves the team.
And head coach Jacques Demers decides to name Steve Yzerman the captain of the Detroit Red Wings. He is only 21 years old,
Making him the youngest captain in the entire history of the franchise at that point.
Demers said he wanted a leader who was entirely committed. He specifically stated he wanted a guy with the Red Wings crest essentially tattooed on his chest.
It's a massive statement of trust, but consider the psychological weight of that. You are 21 years old, leading veterans who have been in the league longer than you've been driving.
Yeah, that's heavy.
Initially, Yzerman responds to this pressure the only way he knows how, by becoming an absolute offensive juggernaut. He tries to put the entire team on his back through sheer scoring willpower.
And the absolute peak of that willpower is the 1988-89 season. His individual numbers that year are almost hard to comprehend in the context of modern hockey.
Let's hear them.
He recorded 155 points in a single season, 65 goals, and 90 assists.
Just to put that in perspective for a second, scoring 100 points in a season is considered a massive achievement for an elite forward. 155 points is astronomical.
It's totally staggering. And yet, he finished third in regular season scoring that year, only behind Wayne Gretzky and Mario Lemieux.
Which is pretty elite company to keep.
Definitely. His peers recognized his greatness, voting him the winner of the Lester B. Pearson Award for the most outstanding player. But here's the paradox. He's putting up historic Gretzky-level numbers, but the Red Wings still aren't winning Stanley Cups.
That has to mess with a young captain's head. You are doing everything humanly possible on the score sheet, and it's still not enough.
Which perfectly tees up the arrival of Scotty Bowman in 1993.
Oh man, Scotty Bowman.
Bowman is a legendary head coach, but he's also notoriously stern, demanding, and uncompromising.
Bowman recognized immediately that you simply cannot win a Stanley Cup if your top players are only focused on offense.
Right, so he instituted a strict system, heavily emphasizing defensive responsibility. He expected all his forwards to be exceptional back-checkers.
Just to clarify, for anyone who might not be deep into hockey tactics, back-checking simply means that when the other team gets the puck, the offensive forwards have to skate just as hard back toward their own net to help the defensemen stop the attack.
It is exhausting, grueling work, and it takes energy directly away from scoring goals.
Exactly. And Bowman also implemented a variation of the left wing lock, which is a tactical system designed to clog up the middle of the ice and suffocate the opposing team's offense.
The problem is it also suffocates your own team's offensive output.
Yep. Yzerman, who had built his entire professional identity as this high-flying 155-point scoring machine, chafed under this strict system.
They clashed intensely. The friction was so severe that it wasn't just a locker room disagreement. The Red Wings seriously considered trading him.
The face of the franchise, almost shipped out to the Ottawa Senators because he and the coach couldn't align on his role.
Imagine how different the history of the NHL would be if that trade had gone through.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the defining career crisis for Yzerman. He is faced with a brutal choice.
Right.
He could hold on to his ego, demand the trade to Ottawa, and probably go score over 100 points a season for another team without ever winning a championship. Or he could fundamentally deconstruct and rebuild the way he played the game.
Unlearning a decade of habits.
Precisely. Unlearning everything that made him a superstar in the first place, he had to accept that a team takes on the personality of its captain.
If the captain cheats on defense to get breakaways, the fourth-line guys will cheat on defense too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He chose to buy in. He sacrificed his massive headline-grabbing offensive numbers to dedicate himself completely to Bowman's defensive system.
And he didn't just become adequate at defense either. He transformed into one of the premier defensive forwards in the entire league. He eventually won the Frank J. Selk Trophy in the year 2000, which is specifically awarded to the NHL's top defensive forward.
It's an incredible pivot.
I really want you, the listener, to consider that trajectory for a moment. Think about your own life or career. Have you ever had to actively choose to sacrifice your personal glory or completely relearn your core skill set from scratch just to elevate the people around you?
It requires an incredible suppression of ego.
And that suppression of ego shifted the entire culture of the Detroit Red Wings.
Because when your superstar captain is grinding in the defensive zone, blocking shots, and back-checking relentlessly, nobody else on the roster has an excuse to take a shift off.
It built the foundation for a dynasty, which leads us into an era of incredible triumph, but also unbelievable physical and emotional resilience.
In 1995, they finally reached the Stanley Cup Finals, but they suffered a crushing sweep by the New Jersey Devils.
But the very next year, 1996, they set an NHL record with 62 regular season wins. And that playoff run gave us a moment that is permanently etched in hockey history.
Game 7. Double overtime against the St. Louis Blues in the Western Conference semifinals.
The tension in the building was suffocating. Yzerman strips the puck from Wayne Gretzky in the neutral zone, crosses the blue line, the boundary marking the offensive zone, and winds up for a blistering slap shot that beats goaltender John Casey top shelf.
It is a legendary highlight. It felt like the exorcism of all their past playoff demons.
But the reality of sports is rarely that clean. Even after that iconic goal, they fell short, losing to the bitter rival Colorado Avalanche in the conference finals.
It wasn't until 1997 that the defensive buy-in, the leadership, and the immense talent finally culminated in the ultimate prize.
They swept the Philadelphia Flyers to win their first Stanley Cup in 42 years. He finally reached the mountaintop.
And they didn't stop there. They repeated the feat in 1998, sweeping the Washington Capitals for back-to-back championships.
With Yzerman winning the Conn Smythe Trophy as the playoff MVP that year. But, the way he handled those specific victories tells you everything you need to know about his leadership style.
Well, the tradition is that the captain receives the cup first from the commissioner, skates with it, and then passes it to a teammate.
Right. And in 1997, just 6 days after winning that elusive first cup, his teammate Vladimir Konstantinov was severely injured in a tragic car accident that left him permanently in a wheelchair.
It completely devastated the team.
So when they won again in 1998, Yzerman receives the cup, and instead of taking his victory lap, he immediately hands it to Konstantinov, who was brought out onto the ice in his wheelchair.
It remains one of the most emotional images in sports history.
And he did something similar when they won their third cup under his captaincy in 2002. He didn't even raise the cup himself first. He immediately passed it to his head coach, Scotty Bowman, who was retiring after the game.
He constantly deflected the glory to others. But we also really have to examine the physical price he paid to get them there, particularly during that 2002 championship run.
He was essentially playing on one leg.
The physical toll was devastating. He had re-aggravated a chronic knee injury that season, missing 30 regular season games.
His knee was essentially bone on bone. Yet, he still led the team back from an early 2-0 deficit in the opening round against the Vancouver Canucks, battled through a brutal 7-game series against Colorado, and won it all.
The sheer pain management required to play playoff hockey at that level is staggering. During the offseason following that 2002 Cup, he had to undergo a major knee realignment surgery called an osteotomy.
For those unaware, an osteotomy involves a surgeon literally cutting the bone to realign the weight-bearing axis of the knee. It is not a minor scope.
Far from it.
He missed the first 61 games of the following season recovering from that. When he finally returned, he was awarded the Bill Masterton Memorial Trophy for his perseverance and dedication.
But the injuries get even more intense. We're going to take a moment before we dive into this next one because it's rough.
It's one of the scarier moments on the ice in that era. In 2004, during a playoff game against the Calgary Flames, a slap shot from Calgary defenseman Rhett Warrener deflected directly upward.
The puck, traveling at immense speed, struck Yzerman directly in the face.
The impact broke his orbital bone and scratched his cornea. It required immediate complex eye surgery and completely sidelined him.
He is sitting in a hospital with a scratched cornea, realizing he is going to miss the rest of the playoffs.
And also the upcoming 2004 World Cup of Hockey, a tournament he was supposed to headline for Team Canada.
You'd think that would be a purely devastating, isolated moment, but instead, it turned into an incredible testament to his legacy. Let's talk about what happened with the Canadian national team.
Yzerman famously wore number 19. When it was confirmed he couldn't play in the World Cup because of the eye injury, the Canadian roster still featured two incredible superstars, Joe Thornton and Joe Sakic.
Both of those men normally wore number 19 for their respective NHL clubs. Either of them had the seniority to claim that number for the national team.
But neither of them took it. They both flat out refused to wear number 19 out of sheer respect for their injured countrymen. They left the number completely unassigned for the entire tournament.
That kind of reverence from your peers, especially from Hall of Fame caliber players like Sakic and Thornton, cannot be manufactured.
No, it's earned over decades of setting the absolute standard for professionalism, toughness, and class.
He eventually returned for one final season, wearing a protective visor this time, and officially retired on July 3, 2006.
He finished his career with 1,755 points, ranking 6th on the all-time NHL scoring list at the time. Detroit retired his number 19, raising a banner to the rafters with a special C on it to forever commemorate him as the captain.
And of course, he was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in his first year of eligibility. For almost any other athlete, that is the definitive end of the story. You play some golf, you make occasional public appearances, and you enjoy your legacy.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because Steve Yzerman was just getting started on his second act. He transitioned immediately into the front office, starting as a vice president for the Red Wings, and even won a 4th Stanley Cup as an executive in 2008.
But he had a burning desire to architect his own team from the ground up.
And the general manager position wasn't opening up in Detroit because Ken Holland was firmly in place. So in May 2010, Yzerman makes a massive leap. He leads the only NHL organization he had ever known and becomes the vice president and general manager of the Tampa Bay Lightning.
This raises an important question. How does a great player translate their on-ice vision into front office roster construction so seamlessly? History is littered with legendary players who failed miserably as executives because they couldn't understand why the players they drafted didn't just have their natural talent.
But Yzerman's playing career was essentially a 22-year education in team dynamics and roster flaws. He didn't draft for pure flash in Tampa Bay. He looked for players who possessed high hockey IQ and a willingness to play a two-way game.
Exactly. He valued players who reminded him of his post-1993 self. Look at the core he built in Tampa. He drafted Nikita Kucherov in the second round, Andrei Vasilevsky in the first round. He drafted Braden Point in the third round.
These weren't the obvious can't-miss first overall generational talents.
No, these were highly intelligent players that other teams overlooked because of their size or straight-line speed. Yzerman recognized their ability to process the game.
He won the NHL General Manager of the Year award in 2015, building a team that set franchise records. He laid the entire foundation for a Tampa Bay dynasty that would go on to win back-to-back Stanley Cups shortly after his departure.
But while he was building that powerhouse in Florida, he was also busy acting as the architect for unparalleled international success.
We absolutely have to highlight his work with Hockey Canada.
He had won an Olympic gold medal as a player in 2002, breaking a 50-year drought for Canada. But his managerial success internationally is arguably more impressive. He was named the executive director for the Canadian men's hockey team for the 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver.
And he assembled the roster that won gold on home ice under immense national pressure.
And he proved it wasn't a fluke by doing it again in 2014. He returned as executive director for the Winter Olympics in Sochi.
That 2014 Canadian team is widely considered one of the most perfectly constructed defensive hockey teams in history. They suffocated the competition, defeating Sweden 3-0 in the final.
That made Canada the first country to win back-to-back Olympic gold medals in men's hockey since the historic Soviet Union machine did it in the 80s and early 90s.
He took a roster full of NHL captains and superstars and got them all to buy into a collective defensive system.
It is the ultimate vindication of the lesson Scotty Bowman taught him decades earlier. Talent wins games, but a unified, defensively responsible system wins championships.
The story then has this perfect poetic culmination. In September 2018, he steps down as the GM of the Lightning. And then, on April 19, 2019, the prodigal son returns.
Steve Yzerman is hired as the general manager of the Detroit Red Wings.
He comes full circle back to the franchise that grafted him as a consolation prize back in 1983.
It is a phenomenal homecoming. He returned to rebuild the very house that he helped turn into a palace decades earlier.
So what does this all mean? When we look at this extensive biography and the timeline of Steve Yzerman's life in hockey, his legacy is so much larger than his 1,755 career points, or his Olympic medals, or his Stanley Cup rings.
It is fundamentally a story about relentless evolution.
He went from being an unwanted draft pick to a teenage scoring sensation. Then, faced with a career crossroads, he evolved from a purely offensive star into a gritty, Selk-winning defensive anchor, because that is exactly what his team required to win.
And finally, he transformed from a legendary player into a master architect in the front office, drafting and building the next generation of champions.
Really is a masterclass in adaptation.
And it leaves you with a final thought to mull over, especially when evaluating your own path. Yzerman achieved his greatest legendary status only after he stopped trying to be the main scorer and started focusing entirely on elevating the system and the people around him. In your own life or in your career, how much of ultimate leadership is really about knowing exactly when to step back, suppress your own ego, and mastermind the success of others?
That is a brilliant question to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the extraordinary career and mind of the captain, Steve Yzerman. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.